think those were my first three areas. Served in Tagajo, Miyako, Yonezawa. Then I went to Akita, Hirosaki, Waki, Furukawa, and Misawa. So I went all over the place. I literally went in a circle around my mission, and then back to my first couple areas. But let's see, I'll talk about Tagajo first, I guess, my very first area. Tagajo was a pretty cool place. It was a small city on the outside of Sendai City. And supposedly Sendai is a really small city compared to like Tokyo or other cities in Japan. But Sendai was by far the biggest city I have ever set foot in. I was like, I'm used to small buildings and stuff that you might see in Salt Lake and Utah Valley and stuff like that, but Sendai City is giant, and I don't know, it looks like what I'd imagine New York would look like. I've never been to New York, but that's all I can like imagine it as. It's giant for anything compared to anything I've ever seen before. Tagajo was a big area right next to the ocean. The weather was pretty crazy. The weather in Japan was pretty crazy, but the weather in Tagajo, I was there from like June to almost October. And so that's the rainy season, and then the typhoon season, and then it starts to get into like fall and the cold season and the winter season. And so I got to see a bunch of crazy things in my very first area. My first typhoon scared me to death. I thought that we were gonna die. I thought the world was ending or something like that. It was pretty much just a big rainstorm with a lot of wind, but it definitely scared me to. We had like weather apps and stuff like that so that we could watch the path of the typhoon or stuff like that, and I didn't know what to expect, so I was just terrified. I was a brand new missionary in this area and absolutely terrified. There was like once or twice when they called a typhoon warning and said that it was just too big and that would stay inside all day. But other than that, whenever there was a typhoon, we just put on our rain gear, put on our boots, and go to work. And sometimes it was really good for starting conversations. Because we were gaijin, or like foreigners, we could really use that to start conversations. We could walk up to someone and look really scared and be like, "Is the weather here always like this?" And they'd always talk to us, and so it was really cool. But it was the craziest rainstorm I've ever seen. And like umbrellas were almost useless because of the wind. You could almost like hold the umbrella in front of you as a shield and keep the rain off that way too. So, but then you couldn't walk because the wind was like, you had this big like parachute or something like that, like making it so it's almost impossible to use an umbrella. So that was fun. Also, we were biking / walking mission, so we had really big areas, but we pretty much never had to worry about going outside of our boundaries, because even if you biked all day, you might not get outside of it, and if you did get outside of it, you probably definitely wouldn't get back anytime soon. So we had really big areas, lots of room to work or walk, but the catch was that we couldn't ride our bikes when it was raining or when the ground was wet or stuff like that. So there were some days in the summer where we'd ride our bikes out to a really far place to try to visit a less active or something like that, and then it would rain. And so we couldn't ride our bikes back and would have to walk, and so we'd have to leave like a couple hours earlier, and besides that, would maybe go out in just like normal pro-sliding clothes and just a t-shirt or something like that, and then it would downpour, and so it would walk back and look like soaked rats or something like that. And it was just a lot of fun. It was excitement all the way around. I remember the first really bad rainstorm, we just got our umbrellas, got our rain gear, and started going, and I was like, holy cow, we don't stay inside for anything. And like, obviously as a missionary that was normal, but I was used to like, before mission life, whenever it would rain, I would like stay inside and read a book or something like that. But that was kind of a shock at first, but also just like towards the end of our mission, like whether you had like wet shoes or a soaked coat from the day before, or whatever it was, whether there was a small typhoon outside or whether there was an earthquake and tsunami in the morning or something like that, you'd get up and go out and start talking to people. And so it's pretty crazy. But crime wasn't really a big deal in Japan, as far as I know. People just didn't I don't know. It was just not super common. People just believed that something was wrong and that they shouldn't do it, and it was like dishonor and shame if they did, and so it was generally a pretty peaceful place. We were told that nothing would ever get stolen. You could leave your purse or your backpack on a train and find it the next day or something like that, and random stuff like that. They would steal your bikes if you left them unlocked, possibly, but I heard the only reason for that was because they were late for work, and so you'd probably find your bike at the nearest eki or train station. So they were late, so they ride your bike to the train station and then drop it off, get on their train, go to work or whatever. So there wasn't a ton of crime in my area or anything like that. The people were awesome. Absolutely loved the people. Most of the time in my first area, my companion would go up to someone and say, and stop and talk to them and introduce them, and then say, hey, he's from America and he just barely got here like 3 days ago. Can you talk to him for a second? And every time he said that, I'd just sit there like a deer in the headlights. Oh, what do I say? And then try to talk to me, and then be like, then try to use their English and maybe say, come on, you can do it, or something like that. And I just had no idea what they were saying most of the time. I was terrified, and whenever we'd do housing approaches or stuff like that, when it came to the language, it just sounded like gibberish. I had no idea where even to start. And my companion would look at me and say, do you want to say anything? And I'm like, I don't even know what you're saying. Just be totally lost or confused. But, oh man, that was, it was definitely really crazy in my first area. Just all of the new things, all of the new experiences, the typhoons, the earthquakes, just being alone in Japan. Everything was just absolutely insane in that first area. All I can really say about Miyako was that it was freezing cold there. And there was also a lot of crazy weather stuff, because that was my second area. I was still getting used to typhoons and earthquakes, and we actually did have a small tsunami while we were in Miyako, and that was intense. But again, we were riding our bikes along the seashore while the sirens were going off saying that there was going to be a tsunami, and we're just like, do, keep doing our work. And Yonezawa was crazy in the same way, because then it was getting into winter, and I've never seen so much snow in my entire life. There was at least 3 feet of snow just on the ground, but then people would shovel it off of their roofs and shovel it out of the sidewalks and shovel it out of the streets, and so it would all end up in piles on each side of the sidewalk. And several times during the winter, it would be like walking down a trench of snow, and it would be above our heads on both sides, and again above our heads or above the cars in the middle of the street and other stuff like that. So never seen so much snow in my life. It was also a very big area, and we walked most of the time just because it was always snowy. But we had this big like triangle where we lived in, basically. It was our church and our apartment, the train station, and a less active and investigator that we visited. And it was like an hour from here to here, an hour from here to here, and an hour from here to here. And we basically just walked that like all week long, going to the train station and 2 hours north for district meetings or whatever, and then back home, and then from the train station to there, train station there, just hours on end just walking. That was pretty crazy experience. Sometimes when they hadn't plowed, we'd be walking through like snow that came up to almost our waists sometimes. Just be walking through it like, can't go anywhere else. This is our walkway. Nobody's plowed it yet, and we have to get to the train station in a half an hour, so we have to go. So it's pretty fun. It's a crazy experience.